So guys, can we have a round of applause for Lisa Spiden of Fibre HR? Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Welcome, Lisa. Thank you for coming in. So can you share a little bit about your story, where you started off as to where you are now?
Yeah, no problem. So as you mentioned before, I actually fell into human resources. I probably, like a lot of people here, went backpacking when I was 21 over in London. Took up a job as a executive assistant for the head of training and development at HSBC, and 20 years later I'm still in HR. So I fell into HR doing some work over in London in the human resources area. My first proper HR gig, I would say, would be at Barclays Capital in London, doing human resources generalist type of work. At Foster's I had many different HR gigs, including international mobility, so looking after all the people who went overseas and looking at how we equalise their tax in different countries and all different elements of human resources, which was relatively complex at the time, but a fun role. I went to Just Group probably about 12 or so years ago, and it was probably my first, which sounds a little bit bad, but my first real commercial HR gig, and it's because of the person that I actually worked for and the fact that it was in retail. I'd worked in human resources for many years, and thought I was pretty good at it, sort of got some pretty good feedback, but it wasn't until I got to the Just Group that I actually worked out that everything I did in human resources had to lead to an actual benefit for the organisation. Retail, as people would know, is really fast-paced, really low margin, you're doing everything on a shoestring and really impact-driven. You're looking at things that you're doing one day and how it actually is affecting store and sales the next day. So for those who don't know, Just Group is Just Jeans, Portman's, Peter Alexander, Smiggle, 7 retail brands. And so it was the first role that I actually, I felt such a huge sense of achievement working in that particular business, because the things that you were doing, you could literally go into store the next day and see how it was actually affecting the people. You know, if it was actually working and people were enjoying what you were doing, and you could actually tell if it was making a difference to the business. And from that, I sort of decided I worked on a particular project, which I won't bore you with, but a particular project around retention and how do we make sure that we had the right people in stores and what have you. And I had a number of people come to me, other retailers, and ask me to do the same thing in their business. And so I went out and thought I'll just do some consulting until I run out of work, and then I'll go and get a real job again. And 9 years later, still waiting to go and get that real job. But I'm really lucky in that time. I've started my own HR consulting business, Fibre HR, that I've had for 9 years. I've worked with some amazing brands, so I learned so much from these incredible entrepreneurs and businesses that I work with. I've worked with Carolyn Creswell from Carmen's. I've worked with Catch of the Day when they had 3 people, Kiki K. I absolutely love working these brands and seeing what they're actually doing, and I'm learning about culture, people, business, what's actually working in these particular businesses, and I find that really inspiring. About 4 years ago, I started a second business, and that business is called Roster Right, and that's looking at mathematically constructing rosters in the retail, hospitality, aged care, healthcare spaces, and so I've got 2 businesses that run from my offices, and they're completely different businesses, different cultures, different type of work, and the 9 years of consulting and the work I did at Just Group and previously just gives me a huge amount of different, experience and insight into culture and what actually leads to great culture. But right now, I run Roster Right on a day-to-day basis. I've got someone else running Fibre HR, but I'm still really across that business. And we're a little team based in Richmond around the corner. So I've only got about, not like Tristan, who's got a beautiful empire over there. I've only got about 15 staff. And that's what I've sort of got at the moment, 15 sort of great staff in my business. It's quite little, but yeah, hopefully, as I said to the team, little things can make a big impact. Mosquitoes are a nightmare. They can make a big impact on your barbecue. We're the same, little, but hopefully making a big impact.
Cool. And how does the culture look in both of your businesses?
So it varies over time, and I think culture isn't stagnant, and it's not something that can be fabricated. I think the businesses change. I mean, one business is highly technical. So in the Roster Right business, I've got 2 individuals who are optimisation mathematicians, and there's only there's 20 of the people in Australia who've got the skills to do the maths that they're doing. That business, along with the other team that I've got around them, is very end task focused, very clear on what they're actually doing. It's a really tight culture in that particular business on the basis that the vision is very clear, and you've got people who don't need a lot of leadership. I could not do the maths they're doing. I'd add absolutely zero value getting up in front of them and trying to tell them how to do their job. What I can do is point them in the right direction of what we're trying to do commercially, and they can solve the problem themselves. So that is very interesting compared to my other business. The other business has got amazing people, lovely culture. It's a little bit more reliant on the leader in that business, because that leader is really setting the vision and the passion, and so depending on what stage of the business is at, depends on how that business is feeling from a cultural perspective. So it's actually interesting sitting in literally one room with 15 people, and you can actually see two different cultures going on in the businesses. All the people are awesome, but the cultures are definitely very different. And so one of the things that I would say, and I sort of jotted down a few notes around some takeaways and some things that I've learnt over the journey, is for me, culture isn't about one certain element. It's not about, have you got a cool space like this, or I've worked with businesses that have got basketball courts in their offices, or foosball tables, or they have drinks every Friday night. And for me, what I've seen over my journey is it's not one element that actually creates culture, and you can't fabricate it. So if you don't have the right people, the right leadership, clear vision, as Tristan said before, it doesn't matter how cool all the whiz-bang things that you've got around the business are, that the culture is made up of a whole lot of different elements. Again, for me, starting from leadership and vision and having the right people in the business. The other cool things are little cherries on top as opposed to what creates culture. So
cool. And how do you know if culture is working?
So for me, when I say it working, I've seen this across many businesses I've worked with and in my own business. When culture's working, you've just got a really unified team who are working all together on one particular vision. The discretionary effort is insane, and I'll explain what I mean by that particular point. We were doing a piece of work for a client probably last year at some point, and we needed to hit a deadline of the Friday or what have you. In this particular business, the entire team, without me asking, without me even knowing, literally worked 24/7, literally overnight. All of them were working to get this piece of work actually done. I'm devastated because I've never ever expected or asked or would want my team to actually be working 24/7. They had so much pride in the work that they were doing, they refused to actually let it not hit the particular deadline. And so the discretionary effort of a culture, when you've got people aligned, is just insane around what they'll go over and beyond to actually help the business achieve the certain goal. You see it in attracting talent. It's easy to recruit when you've got a great culture. Clients can feel it. The actual quality of work, the fact that they're actually really proud of where they work. There's so many elements that just stand out when culture's working really well. And you can feel it. If you walk into a business, you can feel straight away whether it's actually got a vibe of people actually wanting to be there, as opposed to everyone taking off at 4 o'clock and taking as many sick days as they can and not actually wanting to be around. On the flip side, when culture's not great, and I've seen this before when I was even at Foster's back in the day, and you'd hear about cultures of businesses that weren't doing really well. Even some of the large FMCG businesses that pay their staff really well, they've got all the whiz-bang benefits, they were having to pay salaries that were significantly higher than their competitors, because to attract talent, the only way they could get them was through dollars. People didn't want to work there, so they actually had to pay to get talent to come to them. When it's not working well, you've got huge amounts of sick leave, you're dealing with a whole lot of politics and people issues that you don't really have to, and you don't have to resolve when it's all really working well. So there's definitely a massive difference for me in a culture that's working really well and not working so well.
And you said culture being an evolving process. So how do you monitor that and make sure you're on top of it?
I think for me, in my own business, and I'm not sure about all of your businesses, I can feel it straight away. So you can see when a business is humming and people actually want to be there, and you're getting positive feedback and people are just working really well together. But more formally, in terms of how you'd measure it, engagement surveys, actually just talking to your staff and actually asking the question. It's interesting. I talk to a lot of managers who are doing performance reviews, and they're too scared to ask their staff if they're happy, and they're too scared to ask if they're actually going to stay around in the business because they don't want to hear the answer if they're not. And for me, I would way rather ask the question of, what's keeping you here and what would make you leave, because at least I've got the opportunity to address it if they're going to leave and see if I can actually turn it around, rather than sort of putting my head in the sand and waiting for a resignation. So for me, finding out how culture is going is asking the question, how's it going? If you don't want to if you know it's not going well and you don't want to hear it, obviously you're not going to ask the question, but then you're obviously okay with having potentially a poor culture in your business. If you're okay to ask the question and find out what it is that people are actually looking for, then at least you can address it and try and make the culture what you want it to be.
Yeah. And if you think back to your first business, at what point did you think, okay, I need to actively install a culture? Obviously you worked in the HR space, that gave you some insights, but for anybody out there, can you advise when to introduce that and how?
Well, culture is pretty much minute one when you've got staff. So for me, it's not a formal introduction of culture. By the fact that you actually are running a business and the fact that you have any staff at all, if you do, you've got a culture. Whether it's a good, bad or indifferent culture, there is a culture that exists. So for me, in terms of when to address it, obviously you're constantly monitoring it. Ideally, you're constantly monitoring it and making sure that it's where you want it to be. But in terms of setting the culture right from the start, for me, the core things that really influence culture is leadership. So having strong leadership, having clarity of vision and a really inspiring vision, where people actually want to be a part of it and buy into it. Having the right team. I've seen small businesses that have got one person that's not the right fit that can completely affect the culture of the entire business. So dealing with poor performance or managing people who are not the right fit for your business is for me absolutely really important. But I do know of businesses that have had people who haven't been the right fit for their businesses but have needed them technically. And they've sort of come to us previously and looked at ways to actually keep that people in the business but not affect the culture. And one scenario, I'm not suggesting that this is the way to go, but I've seen one particular business where they actually encourage that person to work from home, which sounds a little bit crazy, but it worked. So from the actual office perspective, people actually enjoyed coming to work. They weren't actually influenced by this person. This person thought it was great because the reason they weren't a great fit is they knew they weren't a great fit and they were happy to do the work and do it from home. And I guess all I'm saying is really addressing what is the issue with the culture and then working out if there's a way to, address that, whether it's out, up, around, whether it's even just having an honest conversation with someone around fit. But coming back to your question, is, when to address culture. As I said, culture happens the minute one you've got a business. So, being able to make sure that leaders and all the staff are actually following the values of the business is really important, assuming that those values are, what you want to be. But, all of those elements around leadership, vision, having the right people and making sure people stick to the values, for me, create the culture. As I said before, all of those other cool things like foosballs and drinks every Friday, they're for me cherry on top. I'm not saying not to do them. I think they're great. But that won't, that's a Band-Aid solution if the culture is broken to start with. Mm-hmm.
And can you give us maybe an example of the worst case scenario, something that you've seen that stands out to you? There's a couple of scenarios, two extreme scenarios. So one particular business that I did work with, the leader themselves decided that they weren't, and the execs weren't that engaged in the particular vision for whatever reason. And you just saw it filter through the rest of the business. People were taking sick leaves, they had high staff turnover, people would come to work late, leave late, really didn't put any discretionary effort. They'd kind of do the minimum effort that was required in their job, and you could just feel the quality of the work, the actual environment just felt really flat. Not long after, some new executives were actually brought in, and you can just feel the vibrancy. People actually are challenging things that are happening in the business, questioning because they actually care. It's coming from a good spot and it just feels very different. So for me, culture can be affected by many different elements. But on the polar opposite flip side, I've also worked with a number of clients that have done some really awesome cherry on top things and have got amazing cultures, but almost to the other extreme where it almost became a bratty environment. Their expectation around the benefits just became, really extreme, to the point where when they didn't get all of the benefits all of the time, people were actually annoyed. But they were so far over and beyond what what everyone else's business is doing, what the norm was, that they just had to be really careful that they didn't create an entitlement mentality. So there's a really fine balance between actually making sure that you've got a great culture, you're absolutely looking after your staff. Sorry, I should have said that way before, but looking after your staff and actually treating your staff with respect and respect and value your staff. But then also making sure that you're not going so far over the top that becomes the reason that people are actually wanting to work with you, as opposed to because they actually believe in your vision or your mission or things like that as well. Because in that particular scenario, and a couple of scenarios I've seen, people are high-fiving because they've got such low staff turnover. But the reason people weren't leaving was they were paid so much higher than where they'd get anywhere else. The benefits were insane. And so people are actually, some of them were disengaged and actually really needed a change, but they weren't going to go anywhere because they couldn't get the same perks elsewhere. So there's multiple extremes of the scenario either way. I think it's just about being able to work out what culture you want to create in your business, and actually making sure you're monitoring that and putting the benefits, perks and values, mission, leadership, etc. in place to actually achieve those.
Mm-hmm. And how do you stay inspired, and how do you stay ahead of kind of trends? Do you look to other industries and things like that?
Me personally, in my business? So I guess I'm super lucky in the work that I do, in that if I look at Fibre HR, we were just looking with the team today of the number of clients that we've worked with. We've worked with 105 clients in the last nine months, and I'm really lucky I get to sit down with these amazing business people, and because I work in HR, a lot of the owners of the business are telling me what's working really well and what's not working really well, and so I get these opportunities to see these great things that people are trying and testing, and so for me, I find that really inspiring. I just love hearing people's stories, like Tristan's and like loads of other people I get to hear from. I just think there's some amazing businesses out there, and like Tristan said, it is about looking around and seeing what other people are doing, and you don't have to create things from scratch. It's not about how am I the coolest, the best, the first to do X, Y, and Z. Sometimes it's actually looking at what's working really well and applying that in your own business. If it's tried and tested, take it.
Yeah, perfect. And if you just go back to your HR recruitment process, and you talked a little bit before about kind of the technical skills over the values and things like that. So where do you position your HR methods?
Do you mean more about how I'm sourcing candidates kind of thing?
Yeah, so do you value more so them buying into your culture over the technical skills? Or is it a balance?
That's a real balance in my business. So if I look at Roster Right as an example, a lot of the roles in there are very technical. So I'm really lucky. I'm probably going to offend people because this is being videoed, and I hope none of these people actually watch the video. But for the mathematicians as an example, there's literally less than 20 of them in Australia that have got the math skills to solve the problem. And I think I would have interviewed probably 12. And I'm lucky. The two guys that I've got are insanely intelligent and have got amazing people skills. But I think I would have interviewed a hell of a lot of them that reminded me of Sheldon off Big Bang Theory. And I can't go into too much detail about some of the questions, but they were just such a poor fit for the business. But at that point I thought, that's all I'm going to be able to find in this particular area. And I was lucky that I kept looking and found some amazing people. In Fibre HR, Fibre is all about relationships. We do HR consulting for businesses who don't have their own HR. So from a fit perspective, that is first and foremost. The most important thing is making sure that I've got people who are aligned to the Fibre vision, and that our clients are going to want to work with, and that they're technically very strong as well, because our business is built on that. And I'm not perfect. I run a couple of HR businesses. I've been in HR for 20 years and I've got it wrong. So I'm not expecting that, not all the time, but that's just part and parcel of it. I think my learning is that you need to move quickly. If you know something's not right, the longer you let something fester in the business, the more of an issue it actually becomes. So I'm still not amazing at that sometimes, but that is something that is definitely a learning that I would say. If you know something's not right or someone's not right in your business, face it head on rather than let it sort of fester away, because it usually doesn't get better.
Yeah, excellent. And what does the future hold for Fibre HR? Do you have the long-term 10-year plan, and maybe what Tristan talked about before, the 25-year plan? I've
got more of a 25-year plan for Roster Right, in that
I know what that business is going to look like, and that's hitting overseas markets. Sort of I've got a revenue target and sort of domination in that market. We're lucky because no one else in the world is doing what we're doing. So that's a really cool business. In terms of fibre, my vision has been the same year on year, and I'm, a win for me is if it is the same in 10 and 15 years' time, and that is to work with some inspirational entrepreneurial businesses and provide HR support to help them be the best businesses they can. So I describe us as Sherpas to their businesses. We don't want to take the glory. We've navigated many HR obstacles and challenges along the way, and we want to use our learnings to help other amazing businesses reach their Everest. So for me, that in itself is an amazing goal, because over that 10 years, it might be another 1,000 incredible entrepreneurial businesses we get to work with. And that for me is inspiring. So it's not really about world domination for that particular business or tripling the size of that business. It's just around continuing to do amazing work with amazing people and adding value.
Excellent. Great answers. So guys, we're going to leave it there. Time's up, unfortunately, but we will invite Lisa back up to the stage for Q&A in a second. We are going to have a 2-minute break, but guys, can you join me in a round of applause for Lisa Spiden of Fibre HR? Thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you.